It's the 1st of January 1936. The whole world stands still as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom frantically tries to organise a sprawling empire, whilst leaders of less complex nations sit bored. Then, without any prior warning and before Britain was ready, days suddenly passed in seconds. The Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, who had taken a toilet break because he thought he had time, was in trouble. He returned to find himself months into a war with Ethiopia he didn't remember starting. It's the 22nd of March 1936. Benito Mussolini is hurriedly sending all divisions, including 180 of his newly developed light tanks, from mainland Italy through the Suez Canal, landing at the port of Masao to reinforce his northern front line in Ethiopia, having returned to his desk from the toilet to find his army close to encirclement, with his southern units completely cut off from supplies.
The Italians deploy their light L3 tanks through the mountains of Ethiopia to get to the plain and attack Addis Ababa. And in this, to their amazement, and everyone else's, they're actually successful. But they use up their very precious fuel reserves. Italy has very little in the way of fuel, but they succeed. And for them, it's like revenge for the Battle of Adwa in 1896.
Luckily for the Italians, they forgot to tell their air force to take off and attack the enemy, which saved them a considerable amount of fuel, but now they were airborne. The Ethiopians were about to learn a deadly lesson, but before they could raise their swords at the attacking aircraft, something shocking happens. The Ethiopians can't believe their eyes, as a neighbouring country they'd never seen before suddenly submits to Italy, creating a vast empty front line, which Mussolini's men exploit and rush to the capital from. This causes the Ethiopian leader to leave in a fit of rage, hailing the end of the Second Italian-Ethiopian War. Everything is looking up for the dictator in this, his 40th retry at rebuilding the Roman Empire.
Imperio Tissio es un relaxico momento, not stressful alla Joe Pesci. Mi uno scientistico, molto simplistico Lamborghini Aventador, on el sit around and not do much. Il Taranto is a lazy piece of the shit, perche dovre mongiere la tota.
In his next move, Mussolini decides to turn his eye northeastish towards Yugoslavia, because it's high up on his focus tree. Before long, a full invasion begins. Sadly for Yugoslavia, their requests for foreign fighter aircraft go shockingly unanswered, as the Italian planes once again make the difference. With nobody else seeming to care about that part of the world, and with the only delay to their victory being that somebody had moved Dubrovnik since they had last been there, the Italians claim a second victory. Meanwhile, in Germany, something is building, a movement is growing. What's being built is the Autobahn, and what's moving on it are cars. Adolf Hitler, a leader focused heavily on building German industry for seemingly peaceful reasons, has completed his 4-year plan. Then one day, a newspaper appears in front of him. Before he can dismiss it immediately, he reads the words he's been dreading. Italians question Austrian sovereignty. Before he can draft a speech about living space, Mussolini strikes again and annexes Austria in what would become known as Anschlussy. Realising that Germany's biggest achievement so far was the Berlin Olympics, which most people skipped anyway, Hitler needed to do something. He rushes to remilitarise the Rhineland. However, the Allies aren't playing ball. Hitler foolishly expects them to appease his modest request, but instead they start a Second World War without hesitation. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain gives a speech on the 30th of September 1938, saying,
"I just returned home from a meeting with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler, where I informed him that the United Kingdom would be declaring war on Germany immediately. I hold here, in my hand, the napkin which bears my name and our formal declaration of war upon it. I would like to read to you from it. I've got 800 hours in this game. You scrub. Prepare to get a right good pasting. I believe it is war for our time."
The Germans, shocked by this, opt to immediately launch a surprise attack at the French flank through the Belgian Ardennes forest. But once again, the Allies don't play their part properly.
Famously, the German attack of 1938 through the Ardennes was an utter disaster. The Allies, goodness knows how, had managed to position their forces in defensive lines and knew the Germans were coming.
With their lack of radio communications, the German panzer divisions have difficulty passing through the dense forest, struggling to make out each other's semaphore flags between the thick deciduous foliage. When they finally arrive at the front line, they're met with a well-organised and deeply entrenched Anglo-French army, and a battle that would become known famously as the French Resistance would begin. Historians to this day question how impactful the resistance was on the outcome of the war, but what's certain was the French High Command, led by the dynamic General Gamelin, ran rings around his German counterparts with superior communications and logistics.
It is often thought that Heinz Guderian would have made a fantastic panzer commander if only the Wehrmacht High Command hadn't actually allocated him to a militia division where he sat in Magdeburg eating cheese.
With the majority of the Allied forces embroiled in the conflict to the north, Mussolini declares war on them. The French diligently communicate to their reserves and man the Alps, expecting an attack, but none comes. What follows has become known as the Phony War, as nothing in the Italian army moves, especially after lunch. They joined this war for a different reason. They instead lunged south, towards Africa.
The British never managed to reinforce their troops in North Africa. There was a lot going on for them around the world with the Empire, India, the Far East. They probably just forgot about North Africa, which is a shame really, because back in Britain had come up with this fantastic new tank, the Matilda II. It was well liked by the troops because it got very comfy cushions. But that tank, known to everyone as the Queen of the Chilterns, never sees action.
The Italian forces can't believe their luck. They march straight into Egypt. They're careful to stay in single file to hide their numbers, but they realise there's nobody to hide from. They approach El Alamein, where they expect a large armoured battle to take place, only to discover no British tanks have been deployed, and so keep going all the way to the Suez Canal.
Now the battle in North Africa, of course, has gone down in history as a famous one. The Italians advancing into Egypt actually do very well, defeating the British, and then the Germans, getting wind of this, decide they want a piece of the action. So they send the Africa Corps across the Mediterranean, but aha, the British are waiting with their submarines and sink the German fleet.
Io ho visto Agderi, mamma mia, al po' di scuderia ferali, e tarieri saranno esantoni alti notoseli, Bastardo Fantastica, The Godfather Part 3, El Grande Margarita, Fiat Punto Obelotti, San Pellegrino Bellissima, Nucleo Risoccio.
Unlike the Hindenburg, Germany's Africa Corps was destroyed. Vital troops that were defending the German frontiers had been lost, which allowed the Anglo-French to make lightning-quick advances into the fatherland. Things go from bad to worse for Germany, as while attempting to flee, Adolf Hitler is hanged in the streets by partisans. It's at this moment, as the Allies are committed deep into a crumbling Germany, that Italy launches its attack. At 9 AM on the 9th of May 1940, the code word Duce was transmitted to all Italian armoured divisions, mobilising them in a classic reverse Hannibal over the Alps. The French had deemed the terrain impassable to tanks, and so had not prepared for such a fast and mobile advance. Before they knew it, Italian tanks were breaking down all the way up the Champs-Élysées, and for the first time, Parisian trains were running perfectly on schedule. With the French out of the war, the BEF are stranded in Germany. They do the only thing they can, and attempt the largest evacuation of all time, at Danzig.
Well, it was a total mess, and I don't mind telling you that. See, we got to the port there hoping to see a big old mega flotilla of British ships patrolling, to safeguard our journey home. There was nothing. Turns out the Italians had not only taken most of Germany, but they'd made their way into Denmark too, which I reckon for some reason meant we couldn't get our ships into the Baltic Sea. Anyway, in a roundabout way, we end up getting surrounded and captured. And they take all of our guns and equipment too.
If this wasn't bad enough for the British, the only part of the French forces that hadn't quit, the French Navy, was now under the control of the Italians, giving them a fleet large enough to patrol most of the Atlantic, which they do. This confused the British, as the Americans weren't even supplying Lend-Lease for the Italians to intercept. The Italian plan, however, becomes all too clear soon enough. It's an invasion, leaving from a randomly picked port in Italy, and sent halfway around the world as to avoid the Royal Navy. Landing in the strategically vital city of Liverpool, the Italians storm the beaches, only to take one look at the place and decide they don't actually want it. But it's too late, and before they know it, they're on land. The Italians once again send up their air power, but this time they're in for a shock when they come up against the Royal Air Force.
Oh yes, the Battle of Britain, yes. Not our finest hour, as it turns out. Never before was so much lost by so few for so many. I think the problem was that instead of researching new aircraft types, our scientists were studying important things like nuclear research. Yes, of course, we did have 100 Hurricane fighters, which many claimed were the workhorse of the RAF. Sorry about my moustache, it's a prosthetic. I lost mine in the war. Anyway, these Hurricane fighters were all well and good, but when someone suggested something called the Spitfire, we didn't think we needed it. Which was a shame, really, because the rest of our aircraft was shit.
With the Italians achieving air supremacy, the British find it very hard to move their tank division by day. They end up having to go on circuitous routes as bridges are blown, roads are interdicted by the air power, and of course the Great Northern Railway is on strike. So they are actually, even then, at a whole month, they're still quicker than the poor infantry trying to get across country using the rail network, the buses, taxis, whatever's available.
The British haven't seen a border gore this bad since the War of the Roses, and resort to throwing in whatever divisions they have left, including the Royal Tank Regiment, which was ill-equipped after a recent upgrade that had left it with only one medium tank, with the others on order from the factory.
When Britain finally gets to deploy its one Finnish Matilda II tank, it breaks down before it actually goes into combat. And this is a problem because it's taking about 3 weeks to try and complete a Matilda II tank, and there's only one factory doing that, and it's running out of the raw materials that are needed to build a whole tank.
The Italians seize all of England, but for some reason the country doesn't capitulate. They then realise they're going to have to take the victory points in Scotland to end this war. But the British, knowing this, have put all efforts into the Hadrian Line, a wall of defensive bunkers on the Scottish border.
I was there on the Hadrian Line, defending the seemingly highly important city of Glasgow, alongside my fellow men in the Sudan Defence Force. Me, Jeanette, the boy... You know, we were all there, and in which I was one of the 100% casualties. I mean, they bombed the city so badly, but no one could really tell. Still, after throwing themselves at us for months, they ended up getting bored and attacking a different country instead, leaving the United Kingdom still very much in the war.
In their attempt to recreate the Roman Empire, at 2 p.m. on the 20th of June 1941, Italy invades Republican Spain, who are caught literally napping. But then, the USSR invites the Spanish into the Comintern, and before Mussolini can do anything about it, he's at war with Russia. Initially, the Italians see good success against the Russians when they attack in Operation Barbarossi, mostly due to Stalin purging Zhukov. But the USSR has been maining tanks since 1936, which means the Italians need an answer.
For the invasion of Russia, the Italian military developed the M41 tank, which we now know is a piece of rubbish. They are going to use these at the Battle of Kursk, and we know how all that goes, don't we?
The Italians are faced with a bitterly cold Russian winter, and they're running out of support equipment and captured British weapons. Things only get worse when New Zealand, a country still technically at war with Italy but often forgotten about, invites the United States of America into the war. The US accepts, as they were completely over waiting for Japan to attack Pearl Harbor, which it was seemingly far too scared to do. Once unleashed, the American war machine starts working by reinforcing Scotland with thousands of heavy bombers and dozens of armoured divisions.
I, for one, did not enjoy having the American troops flood onto our line. Our infrastructure could barely handle it. All the pubs were full. They stole all our supplies, my wine, our girlfriends, our boyfriends. Tanks were good, though.
The Americans built the M3 Lee tank, and this will destroy anything the Italians have in service. The Americans were going to go on to build a tank called the M4 Sherman, but I very much doubt that would have been a success.
With a successful US bombing campaign led by ace Amelia Earhart taking its toll, and the Russians in full-scale attack using American Lend-Lease that most people forgot about, the Italians are in trouble. They resort to ancient weapons in an attempt to stop the two superpowers. But before long, the Americans and Russians are both racing to be the first one into Rome. The two superpowers agree to split the Roman Empire down the middle, with both sides electing to take small enclaves of land in random spots just to annoy each other. Tensions start to fray. Both sides believe the other is planning an attack. Soon, the Rome Wall is raised, dividing the sides further. This is the beginning of the Cold War. Both sides build up forces until it's too scary to fight, then go to bed instead, never to return to this game.
So is that okay for you? Because if it is, I've got plenty of things to get on with. All right? Okay? All done? All right, I'm off then. But thanks for that. Yep.
Well, this green screen's not going to stay here very long. It's very windy out today. Right, I'm going to get undressed and say thank you.
Oh yeah, no, you said. Whoa,
Here we go. Right, we'd like to thank the Tank
No,
Museum.
You can't start.
I can start whenever I like. Starting now.
God's sake.
We'd like to thank David Willie from the Tank Museum and the Tank Museum in general for helping us with this video.
Yes.
They've all been very nice, haven't they? And David's very good, isn't he?
He's always
Keep going.
he's great. We like him a lot.
He's wonderful. He's
Do you
a
know
right laugh.
Who else would like to thank?
Go on.
Would be the operations room.
Oh, him. The operation room. Yeah,
The operation room.
Francis from the operation room. He's fantastic. Great narration on this video.
Yes. It was all him.
Yeah, all him. We didn't have to do very much on this one. He's got a new series dropping on his channel soon, hasn't he?
He has.
When's that happening?
It's coming on the 7th of October.
When?
The 7th of October.
Brilliant. Okay, go and watch that. We'll link the trailer below. He's brilliant.
It's about Iwo Jima.
There we go. There's the take.